Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back to my channel, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer, with you guys. Just wanting to share some thoughts on the Chiron return. There's been a few questions about it, so excuse my lack of technological insights regarding creating slides and so forth. I just wanted to bring up an image of Chiron. This actually happens to be Chiron and Achilles. As you all probably are aware or need to be aware, Chiron taught Achilles many of his virtues and artistic talents and so forth. I don't really want to talk about Chiron's myth today because I have videos of that available on my YouTube channel. So please go to those videos if you need to understand more about the myth. But what I would really like to discuss today is some key points for those of you that are having a Chiron return. And I know there's many of you that are in contact with me through Facebook or who are subscribed to my YouTube channel and so forth. And then, of course, there's millions of other people on the planet. Now, those of you not having a Chiron return, this is still worth listening to because the points I'm going to make really describe the holistic view as opposed to just looking at the Chiron return as one isolated transit, because it's not. It's a completion of an entire transit of Chiron's placement when you were born, and when you reach the age of 50, Chiron has done a complete cycle around your entire chart. And that's the place I'd like to begin. First of all, the things to consider are Chiron has very specific cycles relating to the square and opposition aspect as he travels around your chart. Because Chiron has such a unusual and weird orbit around the sun, it could spend up to 9 years in certain zodiac signs and then spend only 2 years in others. So it's a very, very erratic cycle. As a result of that, what happens is that some people on the planet will experience the first Chiron square. That is Chiron, transiting Chiron, squaring your natal Chiron. This is an experience that every single person will have, provided they live beyond 5 years of age. So the first Chiron square is at around about that age. It's around about 4 or 5 years old. So it's a very young age to experience the first Chiron square, and it is very difficult for a little 4 or 5-year-old to assimilate that energy and understand what it even means and what it's even doing. But it does present certain Chiron themes and features even at that age, and they are most likely to be reflected through the family dynamics, the family home that the person is born into. Then there are other people that will experience the first Chiron square during their adolescent years, which again is a very young age. And some of the typical manifestations of that can be, the kid that experiences depression, for example, bullying at school, things like that. Those can be very strong themes that come up. And the later time to experience the first quarter square Chiron, is in early sort of 20s. So you can see from that it's very erratic. His movement is very erratic. So first quarter square, there's a whole group of people, or there's 3 different groups of people on the planet that experience it at 5, adolescent, or in early 20s. And that's pretty different, obviously, just based on the fact of you know, what one's consciousness and understanding is at the age of 5 and during adolescent years, and then certainly in your early 20s. So it's very important for you to trace this back, because the first Chiron square is going to show very particular themes that trigger certain responses, reactions, and conditions in the person's life. Just something I'd like to read to you, and I will be reading a little bit today, simply because it's worth reading this material. Okay, let me just find this section. Actually, I'll get back to that in a moment. So you have your first Chiron square at any of those age groups that I've just stated. And then we have the Chiron opposition is the next aspect. And again, obviously that will vary just depending on when you experienced your first quarter square, right? The first square from Chiron to Chiron. So you have one square, then you have one opposition, then you have another square later on in life. And again, that will vary because it all comes down to what age were you when you experienced your first Chiron square. And then finally, you will have your Chiron return at approximately the age of 50. So two very important things there. First thing is obviously locate the position of your Chiron, the sign it's in, the house it's in, and the aspects that it has to other planets in your birth chart. That's the first thing. The second thing is to have a look at when did you have your first Chiron square, the first square that I spoke about before, which could have been when you were 5 or when you were 10 or when you were 24. So you need to determine that. Then when did you have the second, when did you have the opposition? And then when did you have the third quarter square? And then you are at a point where you're reaching your Chiron return. When you're looking at these aspects, which correlate to very specific ages in life, which are very important passageways, openings of things that take place. Not easy times at all, but they are very crucial in understanding your Chiron cycle and what it means for you specifically, because that's going to come back to obviously where it is in your natal chart when you were born. The other thing to also consider is that as Chiron is traveling around your chart, it will form a conjunction to every single planet and or body in your birth chart. Okay, so this is why when you're looking at the Chiron return, it's not just simply looking at the Chiron return and saying, okay, I'm having a Chiron return. What does that mean? We need to look at it from a larger perspective and a more holistic view, which comes into what I just said, looking at the first quarter, opposition, last quarter, then you look at your Chiron return. You need to draw a story out of what that journey has meant for you, okay? In addition to that, as I said, Chiron is going to, first of all, conjunct every single planet as it travels around your birth chart from the time you were born. And obviously, it's also going to create other aspects such as oppositions, sextiles, conjunctions to angles of the chart and so forth. And I've had a really good look at my, I haven't had my Chiron return yet, but I've had a look at the various aspects that Chiron has made in my own life, for example, and my first quarter square and the opposition. And in looking at those years when those aspects, that is when I had the first quarter and the opposition, when I look at those years and look at the age that I was, I can immediately pinpoint what was going on in my life at that time. And it was reflected through the Chiron archetype, which unfortunately has the element of it to do with wounding, rejection, and pain. It is also the archetype that enables us to um, to heal ourselves, but we can't heal if we are not wounded, as it were, if you can understand my meaning. So let me just find that particular paragraph. I've just lost it. It'll somehow come back. I'll just go to other points until I somehow come across it again. So the other thing to understand about Chiron's vibration is that you may or may not have heard Chiron is often referred to as the Rainbow Bridge. His discovery was in 1977. That's when Chiron was astronomically found, identified, and so forth. And that was those were the years where alternative healing became huge in the world. All forms of alternative healing, homeopathy, you name it, just any kind of alternative healing you can think of, was really born out of the era of the 70s, and it really does correlate very strongly to the discovery of Chiron. Now, in the sky, in the heavens, when you look at the order of the planets, Chiron sits in between Saturn and Uranus. So Chiron is the vehicle, if you like, that acts as the bridge. That's why he is called the Rainbow Bridge, that enables us to basically transcend, if you like. That is to reach beyond the personal planets, Sun right through to Saturn, and access the transpersonal planets, which is Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So Chiron acts as that bridge, that gateway that enables us to tap into those levels of consciousness. And this is why Chiron's vibration, whilst the conditions that it can reflect in our life are very much connected to um, wounded type of relationships that we may have, either experiencing excessive wounding ourselves or wounding others as well. That issue comes up quite strongly for all of us, because we have all hurt somebody at some stage in our life. Nobody can say, I don't think, I've never hurt anybody in my life. I just don't think that's entirely possible when you're a human. So Chiron really reflects these inner states where we have experienced tremendous wounding, either being inflicted upon us or inflicting it upon others. And when we get to the Chiron return, when you can trace back the ages where you had the first quarter square opposition, last quarter square, and look at those ages and what was going on in your life in those times. Who were the people that were prominent in your life in that time with regards to family or other personal relationships? Also, you need to take meaning from where is Chiron located in your natal chart, because that's going to be the field that's going to have a primary core issue relating to fear of rejection or abandonment, fear of not being good enough, fear of being hurt, being wounded, those sorts of issues. Very strong, correlating to wherever natal Chiron is in your birth chart. As I was saying, even though Chiron can speak literally to very literal dynamics in our life pertaining to very important relationships, there's aspects to Chiron that are extremely subtle, very, very subtle, because his energy works very strongly with our psychic body, with our etheric body, our chakra systems, with our spiritual dimension of life, because Chiron enables us to access the transpersonal cosmic energies, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are so far removed from our consciousness. We don't really realize that. We might read a book on Neptune, Uranus, or Pluto, and we might grasp it from some intellectual capacity and understand it intellectually. But in truth, the consciousness that is contained within Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto is so far from our everyday conscious level of thinking, seeing, speaking, etc. And Chiron is taking us to those transpersonal domains, transpersonal energies, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. But we have to go through the fires. We can't access those centers, those higher centers, if we don't go through the fire, the initiations, the experience of being wounded or wounding, the experience of understanding what it is to heal ourselves, because we can't heal anybody else unless we heal ourselves. So these are some of the themes that Chiron represents as a journey in our life for that whole 50-year cycle. Okay, just a couple of other points. So the Chiron return basically sparks off a spiritual transmutation of self that completes all the transformational work of midlife crisis. Now, the midlife crisis that she's referring to there is reflective of the Uranus opposition, which takes place at around about the age of 42 for most people. So it's kind of like we have the Saturn return at the age of 29, 30, and that's a very important passageway leading us into the understanding of the necessity to be responsible for our own life and how we structure our life and how we create and plan and move forward within our own abilities and our own sense of responsibility and maturity. And some people remain at the Saturn return level and don't grow beyond that. So it's different for everyone. But the Saturn return is the first sort of hallmark, really, of that level of maturity and development as an adult, and what that means stepping forward into your life, how you envision your life moving forward, what you wish to create and learn, and so forth. And then at the age of 42, we have a crisis through Uranus opposite Uranus. And in short, that just reflects back to us whether we are living an authentic life. Are we on track with our life's sort of calling, our path, our true calling, our authentic self? And depending on how we deal with that sort of midlife crisis, if you like, that's also going to speak to the Chiron return. Now, whatever matters have not been resolved during your 40s, let's say, with the Uranus opposition at the age of 42, the midlife crisis, you do have an opportunity with this Chiron return to actually examine those issues as well, because the Chiron return is basically an overview of your life. But the overview and what's reflected back to you and what you perhaps wish to finally resolve and heal during the Chiron return holds tremendous potential and power if you bring consciousness to it and bring honesty to it. If you are honest with yourself regarding all the different relationships you've had, where and how you have been hurt or wounded, where and how you have hurt others or wounded others. There has to be transparency and honesty within your own self in order to really channel and activate this Chiron vibration during your Chiron return, so that you can actually transcend sort of further into your spiritual healing and journey, if you like. If somebody is not conscious and they haven't done any, personal work on themselves, the Chiron return is going to be really, really, really hard. it's going to be a really painful experience. It's going to bring to the forefront the reality of your life and what you have been doing. And it's going to hurt from deeper, subtle sort of levels. Think about the mythology as well, where it was Prometheus that was involved in the transcendence, if you like, of Chiron, because Chiron was immortal. He couldn't die. He was wounded by a poisoned arrow, and he was a master healer, and he could heal and teach everybody around him in ways that's beyond our capacity to even comprehend. He was genuinely a master of so many arts of healing, and he taught so many people in that time around him. He gave so much, but he was suffering because he could not heal himself. And it wasn't until Prometheus, who was chained to a rock, Prometheus being the planet Uranus, Prometheus is the Greek name. Prometheus was chained to a rock, and his liver was pecked at by a vulture, a really large bird, every day. But he too could not die, and he couldn't escape being chained to the rock. And what would happen overnight, his liver would recover, and then he'd have to go through the same trauma the very next day. This went on and on and on. Eventually, there was an arrangement where Prometheus, by the way, was chained to the rock because he stole the fire, meaning wisdom, and wanted to give it to humanity, to wake people up, right? So that's why when you read some astrology teachings on the planet Uranus, especially if you read Jeffrey Wolf Green's work, the essential correlation to Uranus is waking up, literally waking up. And that's why Prometheus, Uranus, represents that, because he literally stole the fire, flame from the gods and wanted to give it to humanity. And Zeus, being the planet Jupiter, was just not going to have it. So Prometheus was punished, chained to the rock, and a vulture ate his liver every night, every day, and then every night his liver would recover, so he would just go through the same trauma every day, as I said before. Eventually, there was a deal arranged where both Prometheus and Chiron could be freed of these traumas that they felt, but they both had to die. And they died into the underworld, Pluto. So another way of understanding this story is that Chiron reminds us that we too are going to die. This physical body is going to die. We are going to leave it. And Chiron brings up fears of death, for example, the fears that we may have about any unresolved matters within our own heart and soul, body, mind, where we have not confronted the truth of death, which is death in the physical, but not death as in the soul, the spiritual, because the soul is immutable consciousness, energy. It can never be destroyed. The body, though, which is the weakest component of our experience here on this physical earth plane, and we feel it more obviously as we get older, which is a reminder that nothing is permanent, that we do need to die. So Chiron can bring up all these sorts of complexities and fears around those sorts of themes, and it does until we confront and face and accept that in order to transcend, we need to let go. But the whole journey and process that's going on in the interim is the experience of being wounded, wounding others, and the fear of not being accepted, the fear of being rejected and or abandoned. Because Chiron, in his story, when he was born, he was rejected by both his mother and his father. That is a primary key point to what Chiron brings up in our psyche. So wherever Chiron is in your birth chart, that's a real sensitive point for you, a real sore point for you, and it's where you need to do the healing, but it's also where you will experience pain, wounding, and rejection or abandonment. I can't make this, anything than what it actually is. So essentially, in a nutshell, the story of Chiron just simply reminds us in our consciousness that as soon as we are born into this physical, we are wounded immediately, because we come into this physical dimension and existence, which um, dictates a particular length of life we're going to have. It will reflect the different painful sort of experiences that we have in our journey. It's the human element that is not invincible, that will be wounded, that will be hurt, that will be rejected, that will hurt others. These are the Chiron themes and stories. So going back to the original points I made, you really need to look at where Chiron is in your chart, what sign it's in, what aspects it has, and look at the cycle of what's been happening since you were born until now. First quarter square, opposition, last quarter square, and then finally the Chiron return, because that journey is what's really going to help you understand what Chiron return means for you, which is why it happens at the same age for everybody. But does it mean the same thing for everybody? Of course not. It's a completely individualized experience and story. But obviously the common denominators are the key sort of core central themes, which is about the fact that we are not immortal, that we will die, the fact that we will experience pain, the fact that we will inflict pain on others, all these things. And as Chiron transits around your chart as well and aspects the angles in your chart, ascendant, descendant, IC, MC, as in bottom part of the chart, top part of the chart, those four angles, whenever they are transited or a progressed planet goes over those angles, huge things will be happening in your life without question. But just getting back to Chiron, if you had Chiron going over the ascendant, well, it's opposite the descendant. So what's it going to bring in? Relationship matters, right? I looked back at mine when Chiron was over my ascendant, and boy, it totally reflects a really important relationship that I had that was characterized by a lot of wounding, a lot of pain, actually. So it can be very, very literal. Even when Chiron was square my Venus, same deal. So it can be very literal. But anyway, it's a very powerful, informative, and empowering exercise to go back and trace Chiron's movements throughout your life, depending on what age you are now. And just looking at those cycles that I mentioned, and also when Chiron is aspecting a particular planet in your birth chart, because whatever planet Chiron aspects, he brings in his story through that planet. So that planet is strongly influenced for a period of time through that Chiron energy, which, yes, can be experienced as a really difficult time, a really painful time in life. But it's not happening for some, random reason, or it's not, somebody sitting up above in the heavens having a laugh at us. It's really, truly an opportunity for us to actually do our healing work, do our alchemical healing spiritual work. That's what Chiron enables us to tap into. But it just comes back to what I said. We cannot heal if we are not wounded. And we cannot heal anybody else until we heal our own stuff. So this is the way to understand your Chiron return as well, because when you have your Chiron return, it's literally a return of a 50-year cycle. That is a long freaking time. So what has that meant? What have those 50 years meant for you on that Chiron level? What have you learnt? Where have you spiritualized? How have you spiritualized? How have you healed? How have you tapped into the inner natural healer that all of us are in some way or another? We all have healing capacities in some way or another. We just need to broaden our mind, our understanding, and not sort of identify healing as the healing practitioner that's a professional working in a particular field. We all have healing capacities within us in a myriad of ways. And what that is for you and what that is for me and what that is for your partner is completely different. So what is it for you? These are the questions you need to be asking yourself. Okay. So during the midlife crisis, the chakra opening work is very physical, while during the mid 40s and later, this process becomes increasingly subtle and refined. It's like making a beautiful garden out of your inner being. And um, the fertilized soil. So that comment there is just relative to when you have your Chiron return, because it's a spiritual transmutation of self that completes all of the transformation work of midlife crisis. So this goes back to what work did you do during the Uranus-Uranus opposition if you're there yet? If you're not there, then this won't speak to you. But if you are there, this is going to be very, very a very poignant point, because the suggestion is that a lot of what comes up during that time, the chakras that are activated connect very much to the physical domain. So solar plexus, okay, would be an example. Okay. So with the Chiron return, we can also recognize that if we have done a lot of personal development, personal healing, personal work, whether that's through astrology, spiritual practices, meditation, therapy, hypnotherapy, whatever, there's tons of ways to do it. There's not one way fits all. You have to explore in your own journey what works for you, and what works for you now might not work in 5, 10 years, 2 years time. So there's different, timing is everything for everything that we're doing, actually. So the Chiron return can accelerate your spiritual development as well. Just depends what you've been doing prior to the Chiron return. So she also says here that what becomes sort of really obvious in your consciousness, if you like, during the Chiron return is the time that Chiron was transiting your entire chart and touching every single planet. It's created a crisis every time it's connected to a particular planet, and that archetype of what that planet and archetype represents. A crisis has occurred in some kind of way when Chiron formed a conjunction to that planet. So have a look at that and think about what that was for you, for instance. So, for example, if it was conjunct your Mars, then it's got to do with your personal power. It's got to do with men in your life. It's got to do with your desires, your willpower. If you're a woman, it's got to do with men if you are, a heterosexual female. All those matters would have been somehow, what's the word? Well, let's just say strongly influenced by the energy of Chiron during that time. And crisis matters arise in order for us to actually heal each planet that Chiron touches. Okay. So just a few more comments and then I'll leave it here for today. So the Chiron return is is not an easy experience for many people, and one of the reasons is because what seems to happen is that um, all the transits that you had with Chiron going over every single planet in your chart, this is if you are having your Chiron return now or next year or the year after, um, energetically, all that is activated, reactivated. So the reason it's reactivated is because if there is anything that's left unresolved or unclear, it is your sort of fourth opportunity now at the Chiron return. It's the fourth sort of opportunity to finally clear the issues around pain that you have felt in your own life, in yourself, within yourself, and pain that you have inflicted on others. These matters need to be resolved. And the Chiron return is reactivating all these past experiences pertaining to what I just said in order for them to be finally worked through, healed, and resolved, which is why it's not an easy experience, because for a lot of people, there's going to be a lot of things that haven't been resolved, that have just been buried, shoved under the carpet, buried, or just out of conscious view altogether. But when you have your Chiron return, these old patterns and themes and experiences that were not resolved, recovered, healed, reactivate in your consciousness during your Chiron return. So that's why it's not an easy experience. So it's an important review examination period at the Chiron return of the last 50 years of your life. So it's pretty damn important, right? Okay, so this final comment actually relates to the beginning of this presentation. So if you can just take your mind back to when I was saying at the beginning that some people will have the first quarter square when they're 5, some people will have it in their adolescent years, and some people will have it in their early 20s. Here are some thoughts to consider with regards to where you fit in that age group. So she says, generally, those with an early Chiron square tend to be wounded healers who are blind to how they actually wound others. Those with an adolescent Chiron square tend to be very sadomasochistic and live a circular life of wounding and being wounding with no effective healing taking place. And the final option is those with a late Chiron square tend to be wounded constantly by others and do not process how unhealed they are. They also revel in healing anything but themselves, including wounds they have inflicted that they can feel they have to heal. So those are the 3 different ways that the first quarter square tends to play out in our life experience, story, consciousness, etc. A lot of it is unconscious, if not most of it. So, but the good thing is when you're 50 years of age, you've had a lot of life experience. And if you are listening to presentations such as this and many others that other people put out as well, then you're obviously on a path where you're seeking to understand and find greater meaning to your life and everything that has taken place and why you are here and things of that nature. I mean, if you're not asking those questions, you certainly won't be listening to this presentation. And finally, for those of you, because I know the question will come up, the book that I'm reading from is called Astrology and the Rising of Kundalini by Barbara Hand Clow. Okay, so there's some thoughts for you guys that I think are very important to consider when you want to understand your Chiron return and when you simply want to understand the whole Chiron journey, the holistic view of understanding and looking at it. So I'll be back soon with the other videos that I mentioned. I wasn't even going to do this video, but there was some questions around this as a result of a recent post. So I thought I'd take the time to give what I can at the moment for you guys regarding this subject. So much love and blessings, and next time I will see you. Okay, bye for now.